I was looking at my coffee cup this morning. Not the actual coffee, but the ceramic mug itself.
Right, the mug.
Yeah. And I realized I have absolutely no idea where it came from. I mean, I know it probably says made in China or something on the bottom, but I don't know the actual story of it. And we live just totally surrounded by these objects, phones, shirts, furniture, that just sort of manifest in our lives.
It's like the immaculate conception of consumer goods.
Yeah.
We see the final product on the shelf, but we're completely blind to the massive industrial odyssey that actually got it there.
Exactly. And today we're tearing down that veil for you. We aren't just talking about basic supply chains, though. Today's deep dive into the source material is based on a briefing about AP Human Geography Topic 7.2.
Which covers the spatial architecture of global industry.
Yeah, which sounds incredibly academic, spatial architecture. But really, it's about decoding the hidden logic of the global map.
It is. It's the answer to the question of why is the factory here and not over there? Why does Silicon Valley exist exactly where it does? Why are the raw materials for the phone in your pocket, dug up in the Congo, processed in China, designed in California, and then sold to you in London?
And the big aha moment for me reading through these sources was realizing that literally none of this is random. It's not just companies throwing darts at a map hoping for the best.
Not at all.
There is a very rigid, almost mathematical structure to economic development. It's this high-stakes game of geography and cost.
Right. And to understand how that game is played, you first have to understand the playing pieces. The source material breaks down the economy into 5 distinct sectors. It's essentially a ladder of development that a country climbs.
So let's climb that ladder, but let's skip the kindergarten definitions. I think you listening already know that farming is different from being a management consultant. What's fascinating here is the progression. We start at the bottom with the primary sector, extraction.
This is the foundation of everything.
Mm-hmm.
Agriculture, mining, fishing, forestry. Economically speaking, this is the low value add zone.
Right.
You're just taking raw material directly from the earth.
Yeah.
And spatially speaking, you have zero choice in the matter.
Because the stuff is where the stuff is.
Exactly.
Mm.
You can't put a diamond mine in downtown Manhattan. You have to go where the geology or the climate dictates.
Which is kind of the trap, right? Because if your country's economy is entirely based on the primary sector, you are completely at the mercy of your geography.
Geography and global commodity prices.
We're selling the raw ingredient. You aren't selling the finished cake.
And that is exactly why economic development is essentially this desperate quest to move into the secondary sector. Manufacturing, processing.
Taking the raw stuff and making it into a thing.
Right. Taking that raw iron or you just dug up and turning it into steel. Taking the raw cotton and turning it into a t-shirt. This is where you actually start adding value to the product.
And this is where the geography suddenly gets flexible. You don't have to put the steel mill right next to the iron mine.
You have choices now.
Right, you have choices. And those choices are governed by specific rules we'll get into in a minute. But first, we have to hit the tertiary sector.
The service economy. Retail, nursing, teaching, plumbing, lawyers.
Yeah.
In the developed world, the countries we'd call the core, this is the vast majority of the labor force.
And the spatial logic flips here entirely, because primary industries are out in the wild, secondary industries are in these industrial zones or logistical hubs, but tertiary industries, they hunt the people.
Right, because the product is the service itself. It has
Yeah.
to be consumed instantly. You can't manufacture a haircut in Vietnam and ship it in a box to New York.
Right.
So tertiary jobs have to cluster strictly around population density, where the customers are.
Now, this is where the source material gets granular in a way I really, really appreciated. Because usually people just stop at services and say, okay, that's it. But the briefing splits the top of that economic pyramid into 2 highly specialized sectors, quaternary and quinary.
This distinction is absolutely vital for understanding the modern global economy. The quaternary sector is the knowledge economy. It's not just serving people a cup of coffee. It's generating new value through information and innovation.
So we're talking research and development,
R&D, financial services, software engineering, high-tech stuff.
which explains why we see places like Boston or the Research Triangle in North Carolina popping up, because these industries don't just need a massive population of people. They need a very specific type of people.
Yes.
They need the PhDs, the engineers, the data scientists. So they deliberately cluster near universities.
I had to cluster near the talent pipeline. But then you reach the very top, the quinary sector. And this is the one that actually dictates the global flow of everything we just talked about.
The economic influencers, the gold-collar jobs.
The ultimate decision makers. The quinary sector represents the absolute highest level of leadership. We're talking about the C-suite executives of multinational corporations, top-tier government officials, the people running the central banks.
The handful of people who sit in a room and decide to shut down a factory in Ohio and open a new one in Monterey.
Precisely. And spatially, this is the most exclusive club on Earth. These jobs aren't spread out. They're hyper-concentrated in just a handful of what we call global cities. New York, London, Tokyo, Singapore.
It creates this incredibly weird disconnection, doesn't it? The brain of the economy, this quinary sector, is geographically completely separated from the hands of the economy in the secondary sector.
Totally insulated.
You could literally have a CEO making decisions in a glass tower in London about the working conditions in a factory in Bangladesh that they will never, ever visit.
And that spatial separation is a defining feature of modern globalization. It insulates the decision makers from the immediate physical consequences of their decisions. But let's actually jump back to those hands for a second. We talked about the secondary sector manufacturing having choices about where to build a factory.
Right, the where. Because the source material brings in this guy, Alfred Weber. And frankly, usually when I hear early 20th century German economist, I expect to be bored to tears.
It sounds incredibly dry.
But his least cost theory is surprisingly intuitive. It's basically just a geometry problem.
It's a triangle.
Yeah.
Weber argued back in 1909 that when you're planning where to build a factory, you are always balancing three opposing forces: transportation, labor, and agglomeration. And in Weber's day, transportation was the heavy hitter.
Because moving stuff was horribly expensive and slow, so you really had to play what the sources call the weight game.
Yes.
The briefing distinguishes between bulk reducing and bulk gaining industries.
Think about something like copper mining. You dig up tons and tons of raw, heavy rock just to extract a tiny, tiny amount of actual usable copper. If you're trying to put the raw rock on a train and ship it to a factory clear across the country, you'd go bankrupt just paying for the freight.
Because the input is heavy, but the final output is light.
Right, so it's bulk reducing. You put the processing plant or the smelter right next to the mine. You lose the weight before you ship it.
So the factory in that case is material-oriented. It hugs the raw resource.
Exactly. But on the flip side, you have the bulk gaining industries. The classic textbook example for this is always soft drinks or beer.
Right, because water is really heavy, but water is also basically everywhere.
Exactly. You don't manufacture full, heavy bottles of Coke in Atlanta and ship them all the way to Seattle. That's a massive waste of money.
You ship the syrup.
You ship the highly concentrated syrup, which is super light, and you add the heavy local water at a bottling plant right outside Seattle.
The product gets heavier as it's made, so the factory is market-oriented. It hugs the customer instead of the raw material.
Right. It's all about minimizing the transport cost based on where the weight is added or lost.
But the source material brought up this one specific example that I thought added a really cool layer of nuance to this whole weight argument. Potato chips.
Ah, yes, the famous potato chip rule.
I love this detail because technically, if you take a raw potato and you slice it and fry it, you are removing the water. The potato gets lighter.
It loses mass.
Right. So by the strict laws of physics, potato chips are bulk reducing. You should, according to Weber, make them right at the potato farm, but we don't.
Because weight isn't the only cost factor in transportation. There is also volume, and there's fragility. If you ship fully processed bagged potato chips across the country, you're essentially paying to ship mostly air.
Right.
You know, they call it cube out the truck.
Yeah.
Meaning the truck fills up entirely with boxes long before it ever hits its actual weight limit. Plus, chips are incredibly fragile. They crumble.
Nobody buys potato dust. I think that was the exact phrase in the briefing. Nobody buys potato dust.
Right. Exactly. So even though they literally lose weight, they gain a massive amount of bulk in terms of volume and fragility. So chip factories have to stick close to the market to prevent them from getting crushed in transit.
It's just a great reminder for you listening that cost isn't just about the mass of a thing. It's about the physical logistics of delivery.
Absolutely.
But Weber's triangle has two other corners we need to hit. We've covered transport. Now we have to talk about labor.
And this is exactly where Weber's 1909 theory hits the modern global buzzsaw. In his era, labor costs varied, sure, but transport was the absolute killer. Today, it feels like the exact opposite is true.
Yeah, I mean, we will literally ship a cotton t-shirt 3 times around the entire planet if it saves us 50 cents on the stitching.
That's the core tension of the modern economy. Right. If labor is cheap enough, like the China price phenomenon we all saw in the early 2000s, It can completely override the transportation penalty. A multinational company might look at Weber's Triangle today and say, sure, shipping goods from Shenzhen to Los Angeles is expensive.
Mhm.
But the labor savings in Shenzhen are so incredibly massive that it aggressively pulls the factory location far away from both the raw materials and the consumer market.
So labor basically acts like this giant magnet that distorts Weber's whole triangle.
It warps the geometry completely. And then you have the third corner, which I think is often the most misunderstood by people, agglomeration.
The clustering effect.
Right.
And this explains why, despite the wildly high taxes and the high rent and the terrible traffic, tech companies still pile right on top of each other in Silicon Valley, or why all the major film studios are clustered in Hollywood.
On paper, it makes absolutely no sense. Why on earth would you willingly set up shop in the most expensive zip code in the country when you could buy cheap land in Nevada?
Right.
But agglomeration offers these hidden benefits that you simply cannot get in isolation.
Like a massively shared talent pool. If I run a specialized tech startup in rural Nebraska and I suddenly need a very specific type of AI engineer, I might just be out of luck.
You won't find one.
But in San Francisco, I can throw a rock out my window and hit 3 of them.
Exactly. It's labor pooling. But it's also about infrastructure.
Mhm.
If you're a car manufacturer in Detroit, historically speaking, you have immediate access to highly specialized repair shops, thousands of parts suppliers, shipping logistics that are already perfectly optimized for moving heavy cars.
You don't have to build that massive ecosystem from scratch yourself.
Right, you just plug your factory right into it.
And there's the knowledge spillover effect too, right? The idea that just simply being physically near other smart people in your specific industry leads to innovation. Ideas literally jumping from company to company at the local coffee shop or bar.
That's the real magic of agglomeration. But, and this is very big, but agglomeration has a breaking point.
Yeah.
Geographers call it deglomeration.
When it gets too crowded.
Eventually, the rent gets too high, the traffic gets gridlocked, and the local labor becomes way too expensive to justify staying.
Which is exactly what we're seeing right now with all these major companies fleeing California for places like Texas or Austin. The friction of the cluster finally started outweighing the benefits of the cluster.
It's a constant dynamic balancing act.
Yeah.
But all of this, Weber's Triangle, the location of factories, the clustering, it all relies on one fundamental thing: the ability to actually move the goods reliably.
Right.
And the source material highlights that the rules of this global game changed fundamentally in the mid-20th century with the logistics revolution.
Oh, we have to talk about the box. The metal shipping container.
I know it sounds so incredibly mundane, but the standardized intermodal shipping container is probably the single most important economic invention of the last 70 years.
Because before, the container loading a cargo ship was basically like playing a chaotic game of Tetris, right? You had wooden barrels, burlap sacks, weird-sized wooden crates. It took weeks just to load one ship.
It was painfully slow. It was wildly expensive. And theft on the docks was completely rampant. You just factor in losing a large percentage of your cargo every single time a ship docked.
Just the cost of doing business.
Exactly. But the containers standardize everything globally. You pack it right at the factory, you lock it, you seal it, and it literally doesn't get opened again until it reaches the final buyer. It turned the cargo ship into a cheap floating conveyor belt.
And this brings us back to what the briefing calls break of bulk points.
Right. A break of bulk point is essentially anywhere goods have to switch transport modes. So from a ship to a train, or a train to a truck.
Like a seaport.
Yeah, like a major seaport.
Yeah.
These points used to be huge, expensive bottlenecks. But containerization smoothed that process out so incredibly efficiently that it effectively killed what geographers call the friction of distance.
Which goes right back to your point earlier about labor. Because if shipping became that cheap and that frictionlessly noted, it is the transportation corner of Weber's Triangle got vastly weaker, and the labor corner got way stronger.
Exactly. If it costs almost nothing to ship a metal container full of shoes all the way across the Pacific Ocean, then the only variable that actually matters to a company is who is willing to stitch the shoes together for the lowest possible hourly wage.
Wow.
And that ruthless logic is exactly what built the modern global map we live in today.
And that leads us perfectly into the final macro view from the sources. The briefing zooms all the way out to the core periphery model. which is basically Wallerstein's world systems theory, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It frames the entire global economy not just as a random list of individual countries, but as a very structured relationship, a hierarchy of power.
So paint that picture for us. Who exactly is the core in this model?
The core is essentially the global north.
Mhm.
The U.S., Western Europe, Japan, Australia. These are the countries that control the global capital. They house those quaternary and quinary sectors we talked about.
Yeah.
They generate the high tech, they own the patents, and they own the global brands.
And then the periphery.
These are the countries often located in the global south that provide the raw inputs. They're the ones stuck in that primary sector trap we mentioned at the very beginning.
So they're digging the dirt.
Right. They export low-value raw resources, minerals, cash, crops, and then they have to import the highly expensive finished goods from the core.
And the system is inherently designed so that the value flows upward. The periphery doesn't just happen to be poor by accident. Their specific role in the global system is to provide cheap, raw inputs so the core can stay rich.
That is the highly critical and somewhat cynical insight of the theory. The core absolutely needs the periphery to stay peripheral in order to keep global consumer costs down.
Right.
But then you have this very interesting middle ground that developed.
The semi-periphery.
The BRICS nations. So Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Places like Mexico, too. These are the in-betweeners. They have shiny elements of the core, massive modern cities, booming tech sectors, but they also still have massive manufacturing bases and significant poverty. This is basically where the world's factory floor has moved over the last few decades.
So if we look at the last 30 or 40 years, the core has essentially just outsourced the entire secondary sector, the manufacturing, to the semi-periphery.
Yes.
Yeah.
Geographers call this the new international division of labor. The core does all the thinking and the branding. The quaternary and quinary work.
Right.
The semi-periphery does all the physical making, the secondary work. And the periphery does the digging, the primary work.
And this directly connects to human demographics too, right? The source mentions something called the DTM, the demographic transition model.
It's fascinating because it matches up almost perfectly with the economic map. Core countries generally have rapidly aging populations. They physically don't have enough young people to fill thousands of factory jobs, even if they actively wanted to bring them back.
Right, their population pyramids are top-heavy.
Exactly. But the semi-periphery and the periphery have what we call youth bulges. They have a massive expanding supply of young available labor.
So capital from the old rich core naturally flows toward the young labor-rich periphery.
That demographic reality is the underlying engine of globalization.
But setting it up this way brings up a massive fragility, doesn't it? I mean, we saw this violently during COVID when you stretch these supply chains completely across the entire planet just to chase the absolute lowest labor cost. You introduce thousands of critical points of failure.
We completely traded resilience for efficiency. We built this massive just-in-time world where parts arrive at a factory literally minutes before they are actually needed on the assembly line. Because storing excess inventory in a warehouse is seen as a waste of money.
And that works great when the world is smooth. But if one single massive ship gets stuck sideways in the Suez Canal, or one virus shuts down a major port in China,
The whole Rube Goldberg machine jams up instantly.
everything stops.
Exactly. And that's exactly why we are currently seeing a bit of a reversal in the real world.
Yeah.
Companies and governments are suddenly talking very seriously about nearshoring or reshoring.
Bringing the factories back closer to home?
Right. Not because it's cheaper to do it that way. It's actually much more expensive. But because it's safer.
So we're basically seeing Weber's triangle shift yet again. Security or resilience is suddenly becoming a brand new corner of the triangle.
It is. It really shows that the map is never static. It's always being actively redrawn by these opposing global forces.
So to kind of wrap this all up for you listening, when we look at the global economy, it's really a story of intense separation. We've separated the raw material from the factory, we've separated the factory from the consumer, and most importantly, we've separated the actual decision-making power from the physical work.
And that separation has profound real-world consequences. I mean, it creates massive consumer efficiency.
Yes.
And it has undeniably lifted millions of people out of poverty in the semi-periphery. But it also completely locks the periphery into a perpetual cycle of resource extraction. And it creates this profound sense of alienation in the core where everyday people feel like their local economies are completely at the mercy of distant, invisible forces.
It really brings me right back to that coffee cup I was holding this morning. It's not just a simple mug. It is a physical manifestation of complex trade deals, global labor costs, geological luck, and shipping logistics.
Every single object around you is a massive geography lesson if you just look close enough at it.
Well, here's the final thought I want to leave everyone with to kind of mull over. We talked about climbing the ladder, right? Moving from the primary extraction sector all the way up to the quinary decision-making sector, from digging the dirt to deciding the future.
Right.
But if the quinary sector, the true grain of the world, is increasingly concentrating its power and wealth in just 3 or 4 global megacities, and all the actual manufacturing is moving to the semi-periphery, what happens to the places and the people left behind?
That is the billion-dollar question for the next century.
Right. If your country isn't a global city and you aren't a low-cost manufacturing hub, what exactly is your role in this new map? Are we moving toward a global system where you are permanently locked into being either the capital or the labor, with absolutely nothing in between?
It strongly suggests that the economic ladder might actually be getting pulled up. The historical path from periphery to core that a country like South Korea successfully took a few decades ago, that specific path might not even be open in the same way anymore.
On that slightly terrifying but fascinating note, look at your phone right now. Look at your shirt. And really think about the invisible mathematical map that brought them right to you. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the source material. We'll see you next time.